Well, hello, everybody. This is Manny Aragon of the Rolf Workshop Center for Structural Performance, and welcome again to this episode of the 2014 Endurance Summit. Today I have all of my guests are special, and this one's I'm really excited about today because we have a super neat guy on the phone today, Professor Samuele Marcora. And for those of you who don't know who he is, Samuele Marcora is a researcher in the area of, let's say it's a combination of physiological and psychological training. But really what we're talking about here is brain endurance training. So let me tell you a little background on Dr. Marcora. He received his bachelor in physical education from the Higher Institute of Physical Education in Lombardy, Italy. And then he studied for his master's in exercise and sports sciences at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, USA, and a PhD in exercise physiology at the University of Wales, Bangalore. So he's an international man here. He's gone all over the place, and I'm a little jealous actually because you've traveled quite a bit. After a successful academic career at Bangalore University, Professor Marcora began his post as Director of Research at the University of Kent at the end of 2010. And his role there is to stimulate, coordinate, monitor, and assess all research activity within the School of Sport and Exercise Sciences. Professor Marcora, he's actually really well known internationally for his research on fatigue and endurance performance. And this is again why I brought him on the program. But also a kind of neat little nugget here is that he is a bit of an endurance athlete himself. He enjoys, in his spare time, he enjoys riding his 2 motorbikes and is now applying his scientific expertise to adventure motorcycling. So for those of you out there who haven't heard of it, this is actually quite a seductive-looking sport, adventure motorcycling, where you ride maybe across a continent or for an extended period of time. And there's obviously training involved in that. So anyway, he's got a really neat blog, The Science of Adventure Motorcycling. We'll stick that link in there for those of you who want to go there. But right now, currently, his research combines physiology, psychology into a truly interdisciplinary approach, and he's investigating the role of fatigue in endurance performance. The ultimate goal of his research program is to find new ways to improve performance of endurance athletes and reduce physical and mental fatigue in a variety of populations. These populations include soldiers, motorbike riders, and patients affected by diseases such as cancer, rheumatoid arthritis, and chronic kidney disease. And I'm sure that he's also doing this for triathletes in particular because we're kind of a special breed. So thank you, Dr. Marcora, for joining us today. And,
thank you, Manny, for having me.
And thank you for your research. So, this is such an interesting study that you're doing, and you've been kind of at the forefront of both sports science research regarding the physiological effect of mental strength as well as mental endurance training. But can you give us a little background on how you came to focus your attention on this topic?
Yeah, that's actually quite a convoluted way. So I kind of obviously started as a sports scientist, and after my master in the States, actually started to work with the MAPEI Sports Service, which is a sports science and sports medicine center in Italy that works with elite athletes, including elite cyclists. Indeed, it was funded by the owner of MAPEI Professional Cycling Team, which was, in the top UCI ranking for 10 years. Now it doesn't exist anymore. I've been working with some very elite cyclists. However, at that time I was using, if you like, a traditional approach, physiological. We also did some work on perception of effort, but again, we were just using it as a way to cheaply measure training load. So I was using, if you like, I was in the same paradigm like anybody else. If you like, what really changed my mind was actually working with the patients. And indeed, that's my kind of ultimate goal, to try to solve fatigue in patients, because I was doing my PhD on muscle wasting and muscle weakness in rheumatoid arthritis patients. But although I was studying their muscles, I soon realized that what was really affecting their lives was this sensation of fatigue, which was really disabling. And so when I had the opportunity in 2006 to get a semester off for a sabbatical to kind of concentrate on research. I decided to go in exactly the opposite direction of all my colleagues in physiology, which tends to go on to genetics and molecular biology. I went the other way. I went to psychology, because obviously if you want to study a sensation, you need to learn from people that study these phenomena. So I went for a semester in the School of Psychology in Bangor, which is a very top department, especially also for cognitive neuroscience. And basically I started to learn their theories, their research methods, and then after that I started to apply that kind of theories and methodologies to the study of endurance performance.
You know, you mentioned two things, but the first one that sticks out of my mind is working with, I think you mentioned specifically rheumatoid arthritis patients. I have a wellness clinic, and we see a large number of autoimmune clients, rheumatoid being one of them.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. Fatigue is one of the biggest problems that they face. So bravo to you for helping to address that, because these people really live challenging lives.
Yeah, but you see that the problem is that unlike pain, for example, which is obviously a very important, another important sensation that affects a lot of people with a variety of disorders, with fatigue, what I realized, and this is in a way why I really kind of left clinical research for a while and concentrated on healthy humans, and especially endurance athletes at the moment, is because basically we don't know very much about the neurophysiology of fatigue in healthy people, never mind the people with the disease. So how can you solve a problem like this pathological fatigue in patients if you don't know what the neurophysiology in a healthy person? It would be like trying to solve pain without knowing the pain receptor, the pain pathways, and the brain centers that process and generate pain. And this is basically where we are at in terms of fatigue. We know very little, even in healthy people, and this is where I'm concentrating my research. And of course, endurance athletes provide, because obviously fatigue is a massive problem for endurance athletes, provides a very kind of convenient sample to study. But actually, my ultimate goal is actually on the clinical side of things, but it will take years before we get a solution to that problem.
Yeah, and that's huge, and that brings to mind, the question of how does one study or even get a handle on a sensation like, for example, pain or fatigue? There's a bit of physiology, there's a bit of psychology, but it seems like pain research right now, and we'll go to pain for a second, is has kind of made a few leaps and bounds. I still don't understand it. I'm dealing with patients who are in pain every day, but it's fascinating to me to listen to folks like yourself who are really getting it and studying it. I'm just solely in the clinical setting, so I don't see the research, and I just kind of look up YouTube videos and watch you guys and hope to learn something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's, in a way, actually, the one of the problems that is a massive problem in sports science, but also in clinical research, is actually how you define fatigue, and that's the first problem, because depending how you define it, then you also measure it. So in exercise physiology, fatigue has been traditionally defined as an exercise-induced reduction in muscle function, either in force or power output. And actually, and that can be easily measured, and we know a lot about the mechanisms of muscle fatigue, but that's nothing to do, or very little. There is a very small link between muscle fatigue and the sensation of fatigue. Actually, I don't like to call it sensation of fatigue either. What I talk about is actually perception of effort. Which, for example, I'm quite an heavy guy. I used to play American football. Actually, I was a linebacker. So if you lift me, you're gonna feel a lot of effort, even if you're not fatigued. All right, and that's because I'm heavy. But an increase in the sensation of effort over time when you do endurance exercise, that's what I call fatigue. That's the kind of fatigue I'm interested in. Why perception of effort increases over time when you do prolonged exercise, and because I think that's the main factor limiting performance, and the main factor that athletes use to pace themselves, and therefore the decision, the speed that you can maintain over a certain distance, that's the determinant of performance. So that's the kind of fatigue, if you like, that I'm interested in, is the perception of effort increase over time that occurs with during endurance exercise. Because you can feel fatigue. There are people that define fatigue, as just tiredness. You can feel tired even doing nothing at rest. So that's different from effort. You know what I mean? It depends how you define it, and then based on the definition, you choose the measurements, and then the next step, which is the very difficult one, is to measure brain activity and try to understand which of the many brain activities that are going on in the brain are actually those that are related to fatigue, and that's a massive methodological problem that we are trying to solve, and we already started to publish some studies in that direction. Because unfortunately, a lot of people in exercise physiology, a lot of people talk about the brain, but they never measure it. They measure EMG, for example, so the muscle activity or pacing, but that's not brain activity. You need to measure brain activity, and that's what we have done, and we are already doing.
Yeah, I think that's like you mentioned, it's a huge challenge, because how do you know what activity in the brain is relevant to the fatigue? How do you know that? What does the data tell you? There
are different ways of doing it. For example, one of the things that we already publish is using EEG, electroencephalography, which basically measure obviously from the scalp. It measure the electrical activity of the brain, and it's very complicated to analyze this data. But what you do, what you can isolate very, very, very effectively is the activity related to movement. And basically, you have to repeat a movement many, many times, and then through a very complicated analysis, you can extract from the electrical activity, which obviously is about a lot of functions of the brain. You extract the electrical activity that is related specifically to the movement. The problem that at this stage you cannot do that during cycling or running, so you need to do some sort of kind of intermittent. For example, we use the lifts of very kind of light weights, or leg extension exercise, intermittent leg extension exercise. You cannot do this kind of analysis, unfortunately, at the moment during running or cycling. But there is other kind of analysis you can do that we're working on. Also, because during running and cycling, there is a lot of artifacts generated by the movement of the head. It's a challenge, but not, obviously, you have to take the challenge on and try to solve these technical problems, and we're getting there. And also the other issue, which is very important, which is in a way that's what started my notoriety in this field, is actually not only to measure the brain, which is an approach. The other one is to manipulate the brain in isolation and see what happens to performance. So you know what I mean. In the first case, when you measure the brain, your brain is so-called a dependent variable. You do something and see what happens to brain activity. In the other example I just gave you, the brain is the independent variable. So you manipulate the state of the brain and see what happens to physical performance.
And isn't that what athletes attempt to do when they're out on the course? They're trying to create that mental whatever it is, environment, to be able to get their best performance, whether it's telling themselves to suffer more, or whether it's thinking of, wonderful, place they'd rather be, or something like that?
Yeah, so I'm not 100% sure I understood your question. What I would like to say, which kind of builds on that, is that I think one of the very misleading things about endurance performance for scientists, not only for exercise physiologists, also for sports psychologists, is that it looks like people think that it's mainly a physical thing, which is mainly something to do with muscle, oxygen delivery, lungs, heart, and peripheral vasculature, mitochondria, all these kind of things. And because of that, it's been studied primarily in exercise physiology. And sports psychology didn't really devote much time on studying this kind of performance, because compared to performances like tennis or shooting or, gymnastics, they think, oh, there's not much kind of psychological cognitive component to it or skill component to it. What I'm saying was also what I kind of demonstrated experimentally, but even from pure experience, which was what you were referring to, actually there is a lot of thinking during an endurance event and during endurance training. For a start, is because you have a lot of time to think. Right? I mean, certain sports are very quick. Actually, don't have much time for cognition. It's more or not much time for thinking. It's a very rapid reactions, and you know what I mean? It's not.
Yes.
During endurance, you actually have lots of time to think.
Yes.
And strategy, how you feel, and how it's going to be later on. There is a lot of conscious thought. And this conscious thought is both, in a way, tiring itself, but also is also a determinant of performance. So you need to get your thoughts right in order to pace yourself in the best possible way and to perform at your best. So I think that's also one of the reasons why I think that studying the psychological and neurocognitive aspects of endurance performance is actually fascinating. And as I said, it's a very good sample for me. And lots of people didn't realize that in the past. Be more now, but in the past they concentrated on from the neck down, if you like.
And it's so interesting. The more as I go through these interviews on the summit, the more and more the focus becomes on the mental aspect of the training and performance. So anyway, let's get back to the athletes a little bit. Can you maybe put it into layman's terms, perhaps, what happens to a runner, for example, who hits the wall? Like they get to, say they're running a marathon, they hit the wall at whatever it is, what's the proverbial wall, mile 16 or mile 22 or whatever it is. Obviously, there's a physical component, but what's going on?
Well, in a way, the wall itself, when people refer to the wall, they actually refer to a purely psychological thing, which is their perception of something happening at that mile, usually around a certain mileage in the marathon, right? So they refer to quite a sudden, heavy legs and something like that. And actually, that doesn't mean, however, the phenomenon itself is a sensation, right? So it's psychological. That doesn't mean, that's a bit of a misunderstanding sometimes. People misunderstand what I'm saying. The fact that the phenomenon, for example, feeling these very heavy legs all of a sudden during a marathon, that's a feeling, that's a sensation. So, by nature, by definition, is a psychological phenomenon. That doesn't mean that it's not affected by physical changes. So, but the thing, I'm not an expert on this. I haven't studied the wall phenomenon itself, but I can give you actually, which I think will be useful also to differentiate between the traditional model of performance, the center governor performance, which is a very famous model about brain regulation of endurance performance, and my model. Okay, I give you in a layman terms the three different explanations for the same phenomenon, right? And why it's important to determine which one is the correct explanation, because based on that, you may be able to do something about it. Okay, the first explanation, which is the traditional physiological explanation, is that basically when your glycogen is this sugar, if you like, stored in the muscles, and when it's depleted, you basically you run out of energy. And that's why the war occurs. Okay, that's clearly now even traditional physiologists don't, a well-informed physiologist wouldn't say that anymore. But still, a lot of people think that's the reason. Now there is a different explanation for that, which I'll give you third, when I talk about my own model. Then the second explanation, which would be the center governor model, would be that the central governor, which is the subconscious system that regulates pacing and performance, senses, either through muscle receptors or through another signal which is not clear where it comes from, senses that there is a low glycogen in the muscle, and before the glycogen is kind of completely depleted, kind of inhibits the muscle recruitment. So basically, despite you trying as hard as you can, you wouldn't be able to go faster. Actually, we probably slow you down. And that would be the explanation, the central governor explanation for the wall. The problem is that there is no known physiological way for the brain to know how much glycogen you have in your muscle. There's no receptors for that in the muscle, and there's no circulating signal that the brain can sense to know how much glycogen is left in the muscle. So there's no way for the brain to know that. So for me, it's impossible. This central governor explanation, which has been published in 2 or 3 articles, it's what we call is biologically implausible. There's no known biological structure that can do this, that can send this information to the brain. And the third explanation is based on mine, is that basically now we know that glycogen is stored in the muscle in different areas of the muscle, but what we know is that when there is little glycogen in the muscle, basically the process that translates muscle recruitment into muscle force is impaired. It's called excitation-contraction coupling. So you send your neural signal to the muscle, but the force that comes out of it is reduced because this process is impaired. And this is because glycogen is not only an energy substrate, but seems to have like a structural function. And when it's low, the anatomical structure that are devoted to this excitation-contraction coupling process do not function very well. So what happens is that in order to maintain your speed, you have to increase your what I call central motor command. You have to increase the signals that from your brain goes to the muscle, and this increase in the central motor command is perceived as an increase in perception of effort. And because perception of effort, one of the functions of it is to judge the weight of objects. This is why you feel heavy legs. When you have to increase your effort, to lift, for example, an object, it feels heavier, and this is exactly what happens also with the legs. So this sensation of heavy legs is due to the fact that glycogen is reduced. The muscle cannot produce the same amount of force for a given stimulation. You have to increase the stimulation to maintain the speed, and this feels like the legs are very heavy, and therefore then people slow down. So that's my kind of explanation. Although there may be something else, for example, in terms of there is also glycogen depletion in the brain itself. There may be accumulation of metabolites that induce mental fatigue over time. So there are also other explanations, but I don't think that these other explanations can explain the sudden feeling of kind of hitting a wall that people report. But by the way, not everybody reports that. So it's an interesting phenomenon that I would really like to study in the future, but I haven't done it yet. This is just some speculation from my part based on what I know about perception of effort and fatigue.
Wow, that's a great explanation, and thank you for doing that, because I'm fascinated also, by the way, just to throw this in, about the structural component of glycogen in muscular function. Maybe we could talk a little more offline about that.
Yeah, there is a very good review that I can direct you to. There is very good science from Scandinavia especially, really showing that the problem of low glycogen is not energetic, but structural, and the effect of this structural function on this excitation contraction coupling, on the ability of the muscle to produce force when stimulated. It's a very good body of research to demonstrate that.
How interesting. So getting back to the practical, then if this is all true, then how does an athlete train to increase the threshold of their psychobiological performance?
Yeah. So this wall is a very specific phenomenon. I think the general phenomenon, which is the key, I think, for endurance performance, is the fact that for a given speed or power output, if you're on a bike, if you keep that speed, your perception of effort will increase over time. Okay? Because I think that's actually what eventually makes you stop, or in the case of a self-paced performance, that's the sensation that you use to regulate your power output in your speed. All right. So the key is basically to increase, first of all, the power output for a given perception of effort, and also reduce as much as possible if you like, the slope, how quickly perception of effort increases over time. And if you like, in order to, and this is why, actually, the best way of doing it is physical training, which is what people do already. So it's obviously, if I'm not fit, my perception of effort for a given power up will be much higher than if I'm compared to a fit person. So physical training is still obviously the most important component of endurance training. Yeah, because some people, I don't want to be kind of misinterpreted that basically you don't need to do physical training. Physical training is extremely important, okay? And it probably is the most effective thing that you can do in order to reduce your perception of effort for a given power output, or increase your power output for a given perception of effort, which is exactly the same thing. However, the psychobiological model gives additional ways to improve performance. And this, I think, that's a key. Because if I was a traditional physiologist or even a center governor model kind of person, all I could tell you is, okay, just, do your training and that's it. Maybe take some high carbohydrate diets to increase the glycogen in your muscle and, the usual things. From the new model, I think is already coming out some innovative intervention or technologies that people can use to improve their performance that you would never even thought about if it wasn't for this new way of looking at endurance performance. So I guess the most innovative one is what I just presented at the European College of Sports Science a couple of weeks ago, the preliminary findings that will be submitted for publication soon in a journal. Which is what I call brain endurance training. And this is basically based on my initial studies on the fact that mental fatigue has a significant effect on endurance performance. Actually, what was very surprising, but it doesn't really come out from the paper themselves. You need to compare a couple of papers that I've done, because I've done a paper in 2008 where I pre-fatigue the leg muscles and then look at cycling, endurance performance during cycling. And then I did exactly the same cycling endurance test, but before that I did the mentally fatiguing task. And when you compare the two studies, the surprising thing is that the negative effect of mental fatigue on endurance cycling performance is exactly the same as the effect of leg muscle fatigue.
Wow.
Which is surprising. I mean, to induce muscle fatigue, the subject jumped off a 40 centimeters box for 100 times. So they did 100 drop jumps.
Yeah.
Okay. That's really kind of make your legs weaker.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And the effect, the reduction was as large as the playing for 90 minutes in front of a computer. So that's quite surprising. But then, in a layman explanation, if you like, if you think about it, a training session is a fatiguing session acutely. Mm-hmm. So when you train, you get fatigued. Then you recover, and then the theory of supercompensation said that your body adapts a little bit and actually improves your initial level of performance. And when you repeat this process many, many times, it builds up, and you can actually measure, there is a measurable improvement in performance. But my simple reasoning is that if mental fatigue can fatigue you, on the bike, if you repeat it over time, it may also induce this supercompensation and adaptations. And this is exactly what I've done. Actually, and maybe if you're interested, if you think it's appropriate for your listeners, I can explain to you the actual more kind of complex neurobiological rationale behind it. But from a very simple point of view, the idea is that if something is fatiguing, if I repeat it over time is in a systematic way, then it will induce adaptation that will actually make you less fatigable during the competition. And this is exactly what I've done. So basically, we had and we do what is called a randomized control trial, which is the gold standard to test the effects of any treatment, including training. Mm-hmm. So we had two groups. Both groups they were not athletes. They were like not normal, healthy, active young adults, and they train for 12 weeks for an hour a time at 65% of VO2 max 3 times a week. So overall, they did 36 sessions of aerobic exercise. And the only difference that the control group did only that, so normal aerobic exercise. The brain endurance training group, while they were cycling, at the same time they were doing mentally fatiguing tasks, also obviously for an hour, 3 times a week for 12 weeks, because they were doing at the same time they were cycling. And then we measure VO2 max, and a lot of other parameters, but the main ones are obviously for you guys, the VO2 max and a measure of endurance, which is a time to exhaustion test. And basically, VO2 max was the improvement. There was a massive improvement due to training, because as I said, these were not elite athletes, so they improved significantly, but the improvement was the same in both groups. And this is not surprising given that they did exactly the same amount of kind of physical work. However, the group that did the brain endurance training on the top of the traditional aerobic exercise, they improved their time to exhaustion almost 3 times more than the control group.
Wow.
And this improvement was associated with a significant reduction in perception of effort. So the idea is that repeating these mentally fatiguing tasks 3 times a week induce adaptations in the brain that make the athletes feel less perception of effort during the physical task, during the endurance test, and because of that, they could improve their performance, despite the fact that physiologically the improvement was exactly the same.
Wow. So okay, and this is interesting because I think this is what first drew me towards you. Is I read an article about, I don't remember who visited you, but somebody came out and visited you, I believe in the UK, and had such a training session that they afterwards they had trouble, some gastrointestinal troubles. Yeah, actually it was Alex Hutchinson from Runner's World. He actually visited us when we were actually starting to do the study that I've just mentioned to you. He had the chance to, if you like, tried it like while it was being tested, if you like. And actually, I mean, he's a kind of middle distance runner, but he was actually preparing for his first marathon, and so it's not somebody that is not used to fatigue and effort, but he actually found it quite demanding. I mean, although it's a cognitive task. Actually, you can use a variety of cognitive tasks on a computer. So you're just pressing buttons, but because it's very mentally demanding, it's actually quite hard. It's quite a hard training session, I'm telling you. Yeah, it's not like playing video games. It's much different. Yeah, when I read that, I said, "Boy, I've really got to talk to this guy. This is something. It's significant, when you can get that kind of effect." So, okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. We talked a little bit about the clinical setting, but what other? Can you tell us a little bit about other applications for brain endurance training outside of endurance sports?
Yeah. And also maybe later I can also tell you about other strategies to improve endurance performance in athletes based on the psychological model. But if we stick to brain endurance training, actually, the people that actually gave me the funding to do the study, which believe me, it was long and involved. We started with 20 people in each group, 18 in one group and 17 in the other. Finished all the testing and training sessions. So it was for a training study, it was quite a large one, and it was funded by the Ministry of Defense of the United Kingdom. And basically, because obviously they're interested in fighting mental fatigue in soldiers, and indeed, if you like, the improvement in physical endurance is actually kind of I wouldn't call it a side effect, but it's actually not the only thing that this brain endurance training does, and probably not even the most important one. Actually, the main reason why we did this training program was actually to increase the resistance to mental fatigue eventually in soldiers, but we didn't use soldiers for this time. We use kind of normal, healthy civilians. And so basically you become, your cognitive performance is less effective when you have to perform mental tasks for a prolonged period of time. So to give you an idea, kind of air pilots, fatigue is mental fatigue is a very important aspects of the work, and it can affect safety, and of course staying in sport, team sports, and racket sports, combat sports. So all these sports where you need to where cognitive function is very important, like things like reaction time and decision making are very important, and the competition is prolonged over above 30 minutes, I would say, then mental fatigue becomes really an issue in terms of reducing your cognitive performance. So all these sports can also benefit from this kind of training. But I was very impressed by the effects on physical endurance. I didn't expect such a massive effect, and in a way it confirms what I was saying earlier. That actually cognitive function is not so apparent that it's important as it is, for example, for a tennis player, right? Mm. And it's a different kind of cognitive function, but cognitive function is very important in endurance athletes. And actually, one of the two main cognitive functions which are affected by this brain endurance training. One is sustained attention, and of course, especially if you are an elite athlete, where you really have to pace yourself optimally, you cannot distract yourself too much. Indeed, the very old studies on association-dissociation strategies found that actually elite athletes associate. So they actually, concentrate on their body, their perception of effort, on what's going on, because they need to have that information to pace themselves optimally. And obviously, in order to do that, you have to, to focus your attention for a prolonged period of time. The other cognitive component, which is very important, is called response inhibition in kind of fancy scientific terms. Basically, is the ability to kind of control your behavior, especially when if you like, the drive is to do exactly the contrary. So to give an example, if you're running your fatigue, your body really is telling you, or if you're in pain because you have, muscle damage or a blister or whatever, your body is telling you, stop all the time. Mm. But because you have a higher kind of motive, which is to win or finish whatever is your goal in the competition, you override this kind of prepotent drive, which is actually to stop and continue. And that's actually that's a cognitive function. That's called response inhibition. Mm. And actually, the areas of the brain, for example, the anterior cingulate cortex, that are associated with this response inhibition, are also the areas of the brain which are strongly activated by the mentally fatiguing tasks that I use to train people. And also, the same area seems to be associated with perception of effort during exercise. And the fourth line of evidence is that if you take a mouse or a rat and you damage this area of the brain, the mouse becomes lazy. So basically, it doesn't, it no longer exerts effort in order to get basically more cheese in the experiments that they do. So there is a converging evidence that seems to pinpoint to certain areas of the brain, such as the anterior cingulate cortex, which seems to be really important for endurance performance. And basically, by using this kind of training, I specifically target these areas of the brain. By the way, I think you also do that when you do certain kinds of training, physical training, right? For example, a lot of people physiologists always wonder why what's really the physiological benefit of doing very kind of long duration, moderate intensity training sessions? Mm-hmm. Because really, from a physiological point of view, the study should tell you that you should do only very high intensity kind of interval training kind of stuff, mm-hmm. which is obviously very important. But athletes, is well known that they also do this kind of long duration, moderate intensity session. And I think actually in a way, that's a form of brain endurance training, even if people didn't know that they were doing it. being able to, to stay for a long time on your legs, if you like, and keep going. It's more so the effects of that kind of thing, I think they're actually more neurocognitive than actual on your muscle, on your heart. It's a bit of a speculation. That's another line of research that I want to pursue. Understand the effects of different kind of physical training programs on the brain. That's another thing I'm starting actually next year with a PhD student.
That's great, and what a wonderful field of study, because it's a lifetime of study. You could just keep going and going. So
and also I have to say that there are more and more people starting to to research this in this area. And unfortunately, it's not easy. As a first physiologist, I'm not trained to study these things. This is on the kind of motivation, perception, and neurocognitive aspects of behavior. These are not the stuff that we usually study in sport and exercise sciences. So it's difficult for sport and exercise scientists to approach this area. It requires a lot of humility and studying, psychology and other disciplines. But it's a very fruitful, I think, areas of research and of course also of improvement for your listeners. I think brain endurance training is only one of the innovations that I think will come out of this kind of new approach to endurance performance.
So then what can the average endurance athlete out there do to better train for their mental stamina and improve their physical performance? What are kind of the different elements? You've talked about, I think, most of them, but what are some of those? Let's put it all.
Yes. So the brain endurance training itself, the mentally fatiguing tasks that we used were kind of visual tasks. So basically, clearly, it's kind of difficult to do it while you're riding a bike, for example, unless you use a stationary bike like we did. But another way of doing because we did it, that was mainly for a practical reason, that we did the brain endurance training at the same time as the cycling. Although I think actually the combination could actually be neurobiologically, there could be some reason why it works so well when it's combined. However, another way to combine brain endurance training with your kind of regular physical training is actually, in a way, similar to what has been done, for example, actually with glycogen, for example. That some people suggest to do some training sessions, for example, first thing in the morning without breakfast, in a faster state. So that's based on kind of physiological reasoning, right? So you have glucose down and glycogen reduced in your liver, possibly even or maybe do 2 training sessions a day, so that the second one you actually train with low levels of glycogen in your muscle. So the idea, which is based on traditional physiological models, is not always good to train in a well-rested state. It's good to train in a fatigue state sometimes. And basically this has been applied, for example, with the low glycogen, low glucose. Brain endurance training can also be used in this way, but for the brain. So one of the things you can do is to actually pre-fatigue yourself before going out for a run or a swim or cycling session. You basically pre-fatigue yourself either with these mentally fatiguing tasks, right? And you need at least half an hour, and then so you start your training session in a mentally fatigued state. But also you could also use, especially if you do a mentally demanding job, you can actually use your job as a way to mentally fatigue you. So you can instead of scheduling training session maybe in the morning or kind of in the early afternoon to avoid being too mentally fatigued, you could actually on purpose schedule maybe a couple of training sessions a week or a training session a week, after a long day at work when you have exerted a lot of mental effort, you are mentally fatigued. So I think that could be kind of a non-technological way of doing that. But as I said, we are developing a website to provide the visual task, and also we are thinking about developing an app for smartphones. They use sound, so auditory stimuli, so that you can actually do the brain endurance training while you are running, for example, so you basically the cognitive task is delivered by the smartphone.
Wow, that's going to be
so
cool.
We're developing this kind of tools, but it's going to take a while. And before I want to get the science out, and at the same time or immediately after, people will be able to kind of we'll provide them with these tools to do the brain endurance training in a practical way. But as I said, it doesn't have to be technological. You could, for example, by scheduling training session after a long day at work, which is mentally demanding, that could also do the trick. As soon as you are mentally fatigued before you start the training session. Yeah.
Great. So sounds like there's some really cool things coming out. Now, you've got a website. You've got a couple links for us. One is the Brain Endurance Training website, and I know you mentioned the site's up, but the technological side of what did you say? The training itself isn't up yet, but will be. Are you there?
Sorry, I lost you for a
okay,
second.
that's okay. So the Brain Endurance Training website is up. For folks who are interested in the training program that you have on the site, it's not up yet. Is that right? But the site is up.
Yeah, no, it's not up yet. But people can sign up with their emails, and when the idea is that the project is to have a professionally looking, fully functioning website. And as soon as that is ready, which, as I said, that will be after we publish the results of the study that I briefly mentioned earlier, then everybody that has signed up will receive an email to alert them that the tasks are ready and can be used. And the project that this task will be freely available, so we won't charge for that. It will be just a free site, hopefully sponsored by the university or some other people. We are looking for the money at the moment, but we already have some interest. But the idea is not to charge people to use it, so that it's freely available.
Fabulous, fabulous. And that's at brainerendurancetraining.com. So for those of you out there, go ahead. I've just signed up. Go ahead and sign up. Go over to brainerendurancetraining.com. Sign up to be on that list so that you'll be notified when the site is fully active. Also, you've got a Twitter account, and you were mentioning that there's some, it's not just you talking about your work, but there's a discussion amongst scientists. Is that it?
Yeah, people, some of my proposals are a bit controversial, so it's quite a spicy, sometimes spicy discussions on my Twitter account, but I guess it's useful to, if people want to be up to date with my work. And also I tend to post links to studies that are obviously done by myself, but also done by others that I think are interesting and useful. And but in the area of endurance training and endurance performance, and more specifically on the kind of psychobiological aspects of endurance performance. So I think, if people sign up, they can get in an easy way some updates, and also they can ask me some questions. Mind that I'm a scientist, I'm not a coach,
yeah.
But I'm happy to reply if I can to any question on Twitter.
Wonderful, and what a great resource. So I mean, this is what I mentioned to folks, and so. Even coaches, professional athletes, they're all going to get something out of this summit. And here's something that this hasn't been released yet. So, if you get on that email list and you're just a Joe Blow athlete out there, you're going to have access to this probably at the same time as most of the rest of the, professional endurance community, although the ones who aren't working personally with you, Dr. Marcora. But anyway, I want to thank you so much for coming on today. It's been such an interesting conversation. I'm sure we could just talk and talk and talk because there's so many questions that come up in this. But perhaps
I can talk for Italy.
Perhaps we can have you back again in a future episode on the podcast. But thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Marcora.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Wonderful. So, and everybody out there, thanks for spending the time to listen to this phenomenal episode. I hope you get as much out of it as I did. And this is Manny Aragon signing out for this episode of the 2014 Endurance Summit.